Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Dish with River City Opera. My name is Jessica Harika, and I'm the Artistic Director and co-founder of RCO. We're thrilled you've decided to spend your evening with us setting standard opera. If you enjoy yourself this evening, please, we invite you to visit our website, rivercityopera.org/donate, to make a tax-deductible donation to RCO. We thank you for helping us ensure that programming like this is made possible in the future. And so with that, let's get started. Our host this evening has been hailed by LA Weekly as a force of nature. Soprano and fat politics activist Tracy Cox is a performer and artist whose talent has been recognized across the industry, garnering her a Sullivan Foundation Award, a Birgit Nielsen Prize at Operalia, and a Kirsten Flagstad Award from the George London Foundation. She has previously been seen with the Metropolitan Opera, the Los Angeles Opera, the Pacific Opera Project, and Wolf Trap Opera. Tracy, thank you for joining us on The Dish this evening.
Hi there, thanks so much for having me.
Our first guest this evening is Dr. Imani Mosley. She recently finished her PhD in musicology from Duke University and is currently assistant professor of musicology at the University of Florida. She gained recognition for her viral blog, Humanists in the Machine, and recently started more long-form public musicological writing at Medium. Imani, welcome to The Dish.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. So glad to be here.
We're so excited you can be here this evening. Our second guest is gender fluid on stage, but off stage he's Mr. Liz. In his interviews with Bumble, he talks about how it feels to be living in the wrong gendered body and why he has chosen to forego hormone therapy as part of his transition. Liz has embraced his true self and is proud to be living as a transgender man. He continues his career as a female mezzo-soprano to perform traditional operatic repertoire and premiere new roles written specifically for him. Please welcome to The Dish, Liz. Hi, Liz.
Hi, so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Third up, we've got Meroë Khalia Adeeb. While pursuing a sales and marketing degree at Tuskegee University, Miss Adeeb realized that singing in the university choir would not sustain her love for performing after graduation. Her path led her to Louisiana State University, where she began classical training and continued on to Binghamton University in New York for her master's degree. She has previously been seen with Tri-Cities Opera, the Glimmerglass Festival, Opera Columbus, Annapolis Opera, and Fort Worth Opera. Meroë, welcome to The Dish.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Puerto Rican-American tenor Gabriel Hernández. He is constantly collaborating on new and exciting projects and began his 2019-2020 season by teasing Hindsight, Felix Gerard and Brittany Goodwin's newest collaboration. This summer, Gabriel joins the likes of numerous world-class artists as a 2020 Merlini, and in the fall, he will join Virginia's own opera on the James for their Tyler Young Artist Program. He has previously been seen with Fargo Moorhead Opera, the Bronx Opera, New Rochelle Opera, Del Arte Opera Ensemble, and New Amsterdam Opera. Gabe, welcome to The Dish.
Oh, hi.
All right, and with that, I'm going to let y'all take it away.
Awesome. So first of all, I'm so excited to be with y'all today in this virtual way. I'm a huge fan of each of you, and that's a lot of big brains that we're getting together. So I'm excited about how we're going to tackle these questions that River City Opera has created for us today. I'm just going to try to gently moderate. I'm going to kind of pose questions for us and hand it off to a specific person. But then please feel free and feel empowered to chime in when you have something to add. And then I'll try to make sure that we're kind of all getting equal time. So I think it's probably safe to say that everyone on this panel has some ideas about how the future of opera could and should be different than the current status quo. I think So the title of this panel, right? The Burn Book, after the Burn Book. So I'm interpreting the Burn Book as this phase that we have been in for a few years now, which is the outing of both individuals and institutions for harmful practices, whether predatory or negligent. So in my eyes, the Burn Book phase is a crucial step in making meaningful change. That anger is crucial, and it requires individual testimonials, and then it creates solidarity amongst artists and everyone who works in this industry, and it creates much needed momentum to work towards that change that we're all asking for. And I think it's fair to say that there is some momentum around issues of equity for artists in the industry right now. So then it's crucial for us to take that momentum and transition from anger to action. Otherwise, it's going to fizzle, and then everything's just going to be allowed to kind of continue the way it always has been. So that's kind of where we want to direct the focus today. What are tangible steps that both artists and companies can take to contribute to this industry-wide shift that we're asking for in terms of diversity, representation, accessibility, and equity in general? So I want to kind of start the conversation in terms of the individual, of the artist. What I find kind of fascinating about this industry is that singers are the foundation of the industry, right? Without singers, there's nothing. And yet, so much of how the structure of the industry has been set up, singers are often kind of treated as being the bottom of the industry. We're kind of disempowered in a lot of different ways. So in this era of COVID-19, which has created so many hardships for everybody in this industry, one of the positives, I think, is that it has allowed for a reset in a number of ways, and specifically how we've seen a rise in musicians becoming advocates for themselves. So from frankly discussing the aspects of the industry which don't serve us to self-producing events and live streams. Singers having to become stage managers and having to learn about mics and do all kinds of stuff that we've never done before. So I'm wanting to kind of start the conversation here, and I'm wondering if I can toss it off to you, Meroë. What are ways in which you see this impacting the industry in either the short or the long term?
I think that as we've seen through the pandemic, there have been a lot of online recitals, even some opera productions now, which is cool to see people putting these things together. I think that that's going to last. I think that people are going to start doing more things from home, even as we're able to, be in public in large groups again. And I think that people are gonna group with their friends and put on small productions and put it out on the internet to see. I think this is empowering people with the tools to be able to do that. And I don't see that going away.
Absolutely. And I think just in terms of that reframe of the artist actually having autonomy just by producing that event, actually being in charge. Do you think, Imani, do you think that there has been an imbalance between institutions and artists in general?
I think there's always an imbalance between institutions and artists. I think maybe now we're seeing it more so than ever because we have to decenter the institution in the time of the pandemic. They're not able to wield as much control over how things are produced and put forward just because we're not in concert halls, we're not doing big productions. So I think in this moment, we're really seeing an imbalance that has existed for a long time, but maybe has not been quite as visible as it is right now in this moment. And I think that can be incredibly empowering when we think about how to address these situations going forward and whether or not artists feel like there's any turning back from this particular moment in which they find themselves. Now that you've had a little bit of that sort of creative power and control that maybe artists may not have had before by producing things in their own home, controlling their own live streams, those kinds of things. I wouldn't be surprised if artists find that control and power quite tempting and are hesitant to give that up when things, I don't want to say return to normal because what is that, normal doesn't exist. Whenever they get to a place where we're back performing on stage in concert halls and live venues for people. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to see when that time comes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think many of us were thinking about this when it first kind of hit, that in terms of like institutions have failed us, like we're not protected in our contracts. What do we do now? And now that there's been this kind of shift to like, oh, I don't have to ask anybody permission to make some art today. It's going to be hard to go back to asking permission, I think.
We're the casting directors now.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of casting, I wanted to ask you, Liz, specifically about this question about singers being put into boxes, and how, I mean, if we look back at, you know, some of the most well-known singers of all time, let's look at like Callas, who sang Carmen and Norma and like Lucrezia Borgia, like she sang everything. And there was not this very rigid kind of categorization in the industry. Whereas today, there's like this very kind of capitalist factory setting of like, well, what are you? And would you have an opinion as to why that has kind of evolved that way, and whether or not it serves us as artists and as an industry?
I mean, I think I'm not a casting director, but I imagine that it serves them because they're able to, quote, like, put us in a box a little bit easier, like to file us and kind of categorize us. I don't think it helps the singers. I think that it is really, really limiting. For example, I studied as a lyric soprano for a year, right? And like, I really love singing Mimi, but Mimi doesn't fit with like Carmen or Lucretia or Octavian, or even those things don't all necessarily fit into a certain box. So I wish that we would be able to bring just a wider variety of repertoire to auditions and to have more flexibility in terms of our voices and what we want to sing. And now for me specifically, identifying as male and coming out as trans, I would love to sing like Figaro, you know, or the Count in Figaro, or some male roles. And is there room for that in opera? And is there room for additional kind of gender fluidity and other kinds of fluidity and flexibility, not just with gender, but just with everyone's voices? You know, why can't we all just go into an audition and sing 5 pieces that we love?
Right. Which so often, you know, if you walk in with something that, you know, kind of straddles a Fach or is from 2 different Fachs on your list, you're going to be treated like you're confused, or like you don't understand how it works, as opposed to if you're walking in with 5 things you really love and you sing really well, you probably understand yourself pretty well. And yeah, what do you think?
And I think most of us don't fit into boxes as individuals, regardless of how we identify. I think we all want to be multifaceted beings, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Gabriel? Do you walk in, do you feel comfortable like within one Fach? Do you feel comfortable like being able to kind of present yourself as a category?
Well, I think there is a really important aspect of like being okay with fitting in, because there's this kind of confines in which we have to play with also, while also thinking about like our ideal world. And while I do believe that I can fit in, what I think I have learned, especially over this pandemic, is that intersectionality transcends activism, and it is a representation of who we are. We're all really intersectional individuals. So I really don't like the concept of fitting in a box. In fact, I think it is just pushed on us, you know, in a way that is more systemic than we believe. That's actually where I went with this, is that it's more of a systemic problem. because I think that these people who are in positions of leadership not only want us to fit into a box because it makes their job easier, but because if they hadn't fit into a box, they might have felt that they were in danger, and it creates a sense of safety for them, you know.
I think you're absolutely right about the safety thing. I'll try not to be too rude talking about casting directors right now, but
I'm like,
I really think that there's an insecurity when it comes to the ears of casting directors sometimes, in that if they are having to trust themselves as to if you go in and sing something, in my opinion, they should be able to hear your voice, and think of 5 things that they'd like to hear you sing. And kind of more and more we see, if you're not literally singing the thing that they're casting, there's sometimes they're not able to make that leap. And I think that is perhaps why we've become so dependent on what are you? What is your category? Like, how can I simplify this? And I think, it's not just a matter of repertoire. Also, as human beings, we're all very complex, and so we like to kind of box each other in because it's easier for us to kind of deal with each other that way. But we're not. None of us are simple or flat or little boxes. So we've seen this kind of growing popularity of streaming operas online with the Met broadcasts, and then all kinds of alternative performances, like Meroë mentioned, from live streams to really kind of innovative little opera films that are being created. So I'm wondering, do we think that itself may have an impact on casting, and for better or for worse? Because right now, casting, like normally, we would all kind of be gearing up for fall in New York, right? And singing for anybody who will hear us. But right now, none of us are doing that. Maybe we're paying our $200 to sing for NIOPS, but maybe not. And maybe like this casting is happening just from people looking at these projects that are going up. So I'm thinking, what do we think about that? Do we think that that's good or bad? What do you think, Imani?
Well, I don't know what I can say about from a casting standpoint or an artist standpoint. I have lots of feelings about opera and mediation. So streaming opera, again, these kind of like small operatic films, the ways in which we've seen it take place over the last couple of months, I have a lot of conflicting feelings about it, because I, for one, obviously am a big fan of opera reaching the quote-unquote masses, and a more egalitarian approach to the viewing and hearing of opera, even though in some of those instances that streaming just like represents already existing hierarchies that are a problem, both of a sort of like a capitalist and heteropatriarchal nature. But I'm wooed by the egalitarian aspect of it, but also it can fundamentally miscommunicate the work, or communicate things that maybe were not planned for or presented. And so in that way, or in those ways, I'm sure that it will affect aspects like casting, because the shift, a shift happens in what we think the opera is for, or what the performance is for. There are great examples of what happens when we move from a visual medium in one space, in a space that is sort of surrounded by liveness to a very mediated, unlive space like TV or film, and what that privilege is. And so, there's been lots of discussion about this ever since the beginning of Met Live in HD. It's like, well, can you look good in a camera close-up on your face, right? I hope you don't sweat. You're doing a lot of work on stage and you probably sweat, but I hope you're not someone who sweats a lot in your face, because that's going to be something that we see, right? And so that sort of privileging has already started to happen, right? Again, representing these hierarchical issues that already exist and magnifying them. So if you don't look in a way that conveys the thing that the institution wants to convey, and that could be ideals of beauty or normative gender or whatever. I mean, there's a whole long list. But whatever one of those things that you may not be able to check off for that institution, that then becomes something that may be more powerful or more important than you as an artist, right? Your actual ability to perform and interpret music, or convey the drama and feeling of the work on stage. Because now we can do an HD zoom on your face. So I'm sure that you all are like me. I watched, streams from the Met and Limebourne and, other like small opera houses, big opera houses on my giant HD, 4K television, right? Which I loved. I love that. But you can, it was like that shift when all of a sudden everyone was shooting in higher resolution, and there was that uncanny valley effect, like newscasters who all of a sudden looked like they were in your home. You know what I mean? And so that sort of thing is we're seeing the beginnings of that. And for that I really worry as far as artists are concerned. Like, I'll put all my other qualms to the side because they don't have anything to do with that particular question. But for that point, I think that if we continue on this path where streaming opera becomes, part of our sort of like performance toolkit, then we are going to see those, focuses on mediation that are separate from the way artists perform. So that's something that we have to be really concerned about it and vigilant about going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Meroë, I'm wondering, do you hold any as come from the perspective of a singer, do you hold fear around something like the magic of your voice being lost in translation of compressing it into a mic in these situations?
Yes. The final component for me, and probably every other cast member I've worked with, the final component that makes a performance complete is the audience being there and looking at me and me looking at them and feeling their energy and hearing their applause and seeing people wipe tears and laugh. That is the thing that to me makes it a full performance. And that's what I miss, and also being an audience member and feeling the energy come from the stage and come from all around me with the other audience members. That's one thing you just can't get online. You can hear beautiful sounds, but you can't hear the resonance as well, You can still tell there's a beautiful voice, but you don't have the full piece, you don't. So
right. Yeah, you're missing that physical reaction that you have to really excellent singing when the overtones, and all your hair stands up, you can't get that over a mic. Yeah, so I think all singers are kind of grappling with, on the one hand, there is this egalitarian nature to, we can produce whatever we want. We can really show our vision artistically, but at the same time, you're getting like half of the experience of hearing us as live singers, which is what we're so amazing at. We are live performers, and there's nothing like experiencing us.
And that's why we do live auditions, but have a pre-screening recording, so they can get a sample and put it up on your YouTube, and your family can listen, and your fans or whatever. But there's nothing like a live performance, a live audition. So, but we're gonna have to work with it. This is what we have to work with right now.
Right. Okay, so this next question, I'm really excited to hear everybody's thoughts, and pivoting a little bit to what we want to ask institutions to do moving forward. So this idea of blind casting kind of keeps being broached in conversation and discussions, and blind casting meaning that whoever's auditioning is behind a screen or a curtain, so that the judges, the panel, cannot see what they look like. So this has been standard practice in symphony orchestras for quite a while now, and it was shown to instantly increase the number of minorities and women who were hired. And so it gets kind of broached around whether or not we could do this for singers. And so I'm wanting for us to kind of talk about this. Is this something that we think would be a possibility for a singer audition? What do you think, Gabriel?
I say to that, why not? That's where my head went, because as I've been reading anti-racist literature, one book that really brought me to this conclusion of why not is Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And at the end of the book, he talks about how creating equitable environments starts with the policies, and we will never know if this will work unless we try it. So the conversation becomes an inactive quality of the movement when we say, how can we do this, rather than let's do it. And it always, that is what makes me so excited about blind casting, is like, maybe it'll be great and maybe we'll have a terrible season, but we will never know until we try it, So that's my answer.
Yeah. What do you think, Liz?
I absolutely agree with Gabriel. Like, why not? We should try it. And then I started to think about, well, what is missing? What's the difference? Well, we're not instrumentalists. We're singing actors, and we have something to communicate, like through our eyes and through our presence, And I thought, well, maybe they could do a combination of like blind, and the callbacks could be in person, and you could like check your own if the company's having discussions about equality. You could check yourself. What did I think this person? Oh, I think this person is this now that I see them. Oh, that's something I need to deal with. That was one thing I thought. Another thing I thought was, why not just do it all blind? And then if you get somebody who isn't as good of an actor or an actress as you expected, why not support them? Why not have people on your staff to help them become their best self? So those were my kind of thoughts about blind casting.
Absolutely. And I think like that's the most common pushback that we hear is like, well, we're not instrumentalists. There's so much that we have to see about your physicality and your acting on stage. And I'm just of the opinion that if you, like, our entire job, right, is to communicate through
the voice.
So if you can't communicate through the singing, we're going to be able to hear it pretty quickly, I think. So I tend to think that it wouldn't be as much of an issue as the pushback kind of entails.
I agree.
But, yeah.
I think people just don't want to face their own kind of, ideas that they have about what people look like.
Yeah.
I think people don't want to really look at that. They're like, oh, it's easier. We have to see it because of the acting, instead of actually looking at the issues.
Right.
Oh, and what Imani was saying earlier, she brought up the term normativity, and that has been a really strong term in my journey through activism, because we have these normative ideas of what acting and people need to look like within an operatic environment. And I think that's what scares the casting directors, is those normative qualities they're so used to, you know?
Yeah. Yes, you're speaking my language. As a fat activist, I can't tell you how many times I've faced the language of the conflation between acting and what acting looks like in my body. There is always that conflation of like a fat person can't act or physically embody something, which I tend to disagree with. Okay, so now we have maybe we should also look at the person who's casting and ask why we need blind casting in the first place. Yes, Elliot, thank you. What would could companies do right now to foster an artist pool that is more diverse on multiple levels? So race, age, body type, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. This is a gigantic question, obviously. So we just started with one little idea of how we could increase the artist pool with maybe blind casting. Are there any other kind of ideas around this that you have percolating?
Well, one easy thing, or at least to me it's easy, I know there are reasons for this, but eliminating application fees opens up opportunity to so many people. There have been many times that I did not apply for something because it was $70. And I'm trying to sing for as many people as possible. So if one company is charging $70, I would rather sing for 2 or 3 others than that one, you know, because it's not just that. I also have to get transportation to New York. I used to live in Maryland. Now I'm like across the bridge, but there's so many factors. That's an easy thing. And then of course, blind casting. I agree with you guys. Like, why not? What you might end up with this, strange version of casting, but isn't the voice supposed to come first? I thought that that's what we do in our lessons and our coaching. We're working on the voice. So everything else needs to be put behind that. If you end up with an opera full of the most amazing singers, you win. Forget what they look like. And then also train them how to act if, you're not impressed with it once you cast them.
Right. And I'm not trying to downplay how important, the theatrical experience is at the opera, but I'm also saying that I don't think anyone has ever bought an opera ticket for the acting. I mean,
absolutely not.
Are there other ideas you have about like diversity in the artist pool?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it is safe to say that these people aren't reading, because there is so much literature towards equity. I mean, Angela Davis coined the term anti-racist almost 50 years ago, So there is so much information about equity and the strive for that I would say that let's start reading more about contemporary philosophy and talking about the things that people have been talking about. One thing that I've been seeing on social media a lot is that people are using the information from the census to say, this is how things are not created equal. So why not use that for auditions? If y'all are so stressed, just use the demographics that you see through America and create a space where 14% of your auditioners are going to be Black. 20% of your auditioners are going to be Latino, Latinx, and that would at least be a start to using the information that we already have to create more equitable environments,
Yeah.
I have something that maybe Imani could comment on. This
Okay.
idea that I had about looking internally at each company and who runs the company. What types of people, are they all white men in one room, for example? Are half of them misogynistic? I don't know. Like looking at your company and trying to see what is your company's mission, what is your company's vision for equality, and if that's not there, then nothing's going to change. So my question is, how does that change? Because right now there's a lot of companies that are like in a bubble, and so they're not going to read the books. They're just going to keep doing what they have been doing. But how do we demand that kind of change as artists from the companies that exist?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or from the donors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way is to focus on money first. That's always the first thing you have to divest from donors that wield a lot of power. But I've been sitting on this issue of blind casting, and this goes to your question, Liz, because everything that everyone is saying is great. I don't disagree. However, what I think that conversation obscures is, or leads one to believe, is that, say you have an opera company that does blind casting, right? Like all the way to the end. And then they see, after the result of going through that process, who is left. We're making the assumption that they would see those people, and based off of that blind casting audition, would still go ahead and cast those people. And I think that is an incredibly naive place from which to start, right? As that's the whole reason why I think there's not blind casting in the first place, because there's always going to be that decision about a vision, quote unquote, an artistic vision, a vision of a company, who a company and who an artistic director are beholden to, right? And so you could have the best singer do a blind casting audition for that role and be someone who, again, as I said before, doesn't necessarily tick off those already pre-existing normative boxes, and then be seen by a casting director at all, and then someone say, you know what? No. Even though you've made it this far in this hypothetical blind audition, we now see you, right? And everything that your body presents, and we are still going to go ahead and make the decision not to cast you, because that's the reality here, right? And so, as much as I would love to say, yeah, let's just all have blind casting, right? That is making the assumption that artists and their power as artists supersedes the power of an institution, and it doesn't, right? It doesn't. So the question about what artists can or need to demand from institutions and what they're looking at in regard to casting or the structure of the institution writ large, right? You have to assess on an institution by institution basis who they are beholden to, right? Who they believe their audience is, and that is not just, when I say audience, that's not just the people who are sitting in the seats, right? It's the people who have decided to give large gifts. It's the people who have decided to sit on the board. It's the people who have decided to give the money that allows for the creation of a new opera, right, or a new production. That's the audience. And as long as that audience feels a certain way about how opera should look and sound, there's no motivation for a company to change from that route. So for me, it always has to go back to an idea of divestment, and that's monetarily to start, but just, taking away that really deep connection between donors and benefactors. We're talking large scale here, not just like, hey, I've decided to, donate $25 to the Met. Obviously, that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the people who are able to put their names on buildings, right? Until we have that conversation, and until we ask that conversation of the people who run these institutions, then everything else, it doesn't matter, right? Once we get to that place, then we can start to have the conversation about things like casting, because then there's the freedom to allow for different bodies, voices, presentations, whatever, to happen on stage, because the audience has changed, right? But that concept of benefactors as audience, donors as audience, money as audience, is always going to be rooted in whiteness, and it's always going to be rooted in capitalism, and both of those things are anathemas to change, right? So that's the conversation that has to be had in order for all of the other bits of change that we're talking about, which are important, but in the scale of things are much lower down in the list, right? We can't have that conversation and talk about actionable steps until we have that first conversation.
And if I may, I actually went here too. That's exactly where my mind went. Like, in activism, we always talk about power. Like, who has the power? Who has the true power in this situation? And like Imani was saying, the power is withheld truly by the donor societies, and the board. And how I was reimagining how we could have a new donorship is actually working through new music. The Michael B. Jordan Foundation set aside $200 million for businesses and philanthropy that were working towards anti-racism. One of the inventors of Twitter just sent $10 million to the Center for Anti-Racist Research. There are people in America who are looking to fund large institutions who have equitable ideals in their minds, and I am so there with you, Imani, about restructuring the donor identity is so important to enacting any of this. It's just a conundrum, because how do we draw them?
Yeah, I think you're totally right, both Imani and Gabriel. And this kind of goes to the kind of last question that I have for us today, which is, if you could be in a room with everyone currently running an opera company in this country, what would you ask them to do to move the art form forward? So I'm pretty sure I know what you might say, Imani, but...
I mean, I feel like anyone who's talked to me about this or heard me talk about it as I've been talking about it at length for years is familiar with what I have to say on this particular topic, which is like, who are you serving? And be honest about who it is that you're serving. I have had the opportunity to speak with people who run opera companies, and they find themselves stuck between the rock and a hard place of being a business and being an artistic organization, right? And feeling like they're not able to produce their artistic vision without having the funding to do so. And I understand that dilemma, right? I'm not saying that like, opera companies should just exist without money, because that's totally plausible in 2020, right? Like it's not until we've removed ourselves from the shackles of capitalism. Like that's not possible. So I'm not ignoring that at all. But that discussion of money, it affects everything. It affects the choice of repertoire, and like how harmful that repertoire can be. A discussion around repertoire, a discussion around casting, like they're all interrelated, and companies don't want to own up to that, right? So I would say just be honest about about who it is you're serving and what it is that you're serving, right? If you are willing to say to me, we see ourselves as a business and we want to do the things that are the most effective for us as a business, which means programming AIDA every year or what have you, then okay, right? Like, is that what I want personally? No, but at least you're being honest about what it is you feel your job is, you know? And then you can have connections with all of the donors and benefactors that you want because you're serving them, right? But don't tell me that you're concerned about equity on the one hand, and then program the things that you do and cast the things that you do and take money from the people that you do, because you can't do both, right? So choose one and go with that, and let that choice be known by the people who are paying the money that they have, that they save, to come see your productions in person, right? To see the people that you cast. Like, let them know so they can make a decision with their wallets about whether or not they want to give that money to you and the art that you're playing.
Absolutely. Liz?
Imani said it all.
Yeah.
No, transparency, like having each company just be more clear about, and having these hard conversations internally about what's really important to them.
Yeah.
You know, and perhaps streamlining that and then making it easier for us, right? And then we can audition for things for companies that we're passionate for, you know, and then we have good matches as well. And that's just better chemistry for everyone. But we can't do that when everyone's just kind of like scared and no one talks about things, you know?
Absolutely. Meroë?
Imani hit the nail on the head. The thing is, the bottom line is it takes money to run any business. And I don't think that most people have the ability to be extremely transparent, especially on a public forum. Not like this, but I don't see that being realistic, that an opera company or any business or corporation can truly know that they are serving their donors and their board members and tell that to their customers. Like, that's just, no one's going to keep it real like that. That's just not going to happen. So, but we can know that and make our own decisions when it comes to attending performances and supporting a certain organization, whether it be attending or working for them. And yeah, I'm not sure, but I will say, I think that companies, need to really work on, and I know, again, this costs money, commissioning new works. Okay.
Yes.
Living composers, they're out of here. Okay. They're trying to get their stuff heard while they're still breathing. And I think that taking performances into non-traditional venues, which is something that River City Opera fully intends on doing, that is how you're going to get a different type of audience and turn people on to opera. And yeah, I think that I did a performance, where is this, Minneapolis, in a boxing ring. It was so amazing. The audience was surrounding me. Everyone had like wine and beer in their hands. They were cheering like American Idol. Like, it was different and fun, and it revived my soul too. If you take, it's the same music. We performed opera, arias, but it just took it out of the theater, and it was so fresh. And every company can do that. So that's my advice, is to think outside of the walls of the theater and then bring it back into the theater. I still want to go see a show, and sit orchestra centered. I want both. I want it all.
And Gabriel, what would you say to everybody running an opera company?
Yeah, well, just listening to everybody really inspired me to think about what would I say next, because I feel like everybody's points are like what I had and plus. So what I would say next is, when you have the opportunity to work on new music, last week, Nkuru Okoye was talking about how you have to know your audience. And if you get the opportunity to actually do a new piece for an audience, get to know both audiences, because you can speak to both of those audiences at the same time as you have been in your marketing, and that is the most important thing for me, is that I know you are not only looking out for the donors, because a lot of the time when I go to these big institutions and I watch, I know that it's not for me. And a lot of people in my socioeconomic standing know that it's not for them, and that's why they are disinterested. So let's listen to our composers and start writing for the audiences that we want, and we can do that intersectionally, doesn't have to be one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of us have touched on this point of asking companies to decide who they are and who their audience is. I think that constantly we're hearing the bemoaning of, the audiences are dying off, and, opera's been dying for 200 years, right? But part of the solution to that is you cannot at the same time be forward thinking and attracting new audiences while actually what you're doing is going after the exact same audience. You can't have both of those things be possible. And the other thing that I would say personally, I'm envisioning like a tribunal, every single general director is sitting in front of me. I think I really like this kind of era where singers are having more autonomy and more power. Yes, I completely agree that kind of donors are the ones that are shaping our industry right now. But I honestly think that companies should understand that singers are becoming more organized and more finding more clarity around what they deserve and the kind of transparency that they need in this industry. So personally, I'm envisioning a new world where, maybe singers are certifying companies together in solidarity, giving them ratings for who works there and how they're treated and how much they're paid. So that maybe we can make decisions and we don't just sing for anybody who will hear us, and we sing intentionally for specific companies we want to work with and we want to make art with. Maybe that's pie in the sky, but that's kind of where COVID has my brain going. It's power to the singers, power to the people. Yeah. There's Jessica.
That was absolutely amazing. I think that's fantastic. We're almost out of time, so I just wanted to pop on, and I have a very selfish question for you all to sort of wrap us up this evening. But I feel like people are using this pause now for great moments of creativity, and RCO was certainly born out of an inkling of a dream that I finally had time to put on its feet with amazing Millie Lineback and Jonathan Haney. And so if you had one little morsel of advice for me or for other artists sort of starting young endeavors about how to ensure that we build these values into the foundation of our company, one little tidbit of advice to ensure that we have actionable steps to take moving forward. Does that make sense? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I think transparency is the name of the day. So name your company, have your mission statement as one of the first things I can find out about your company. And not only that, have everybody who works there, I think they should write a mission statement too. What are your values? What kind of art do you want to make, and who do you want to empower to make it?
Amazing. Imani?
I would say to remember that opera has never been static and has always been, we forget that it's always been about change and adaptation. So keep that at the front of your mind, that this is an art form that was born out of a need for adaptation and pulling things in and kicking things out when they don't work, and constantly changing and evolving. So if anyone tells you that it has to be done in a specific way, that a company has to be run in a specific way, just say, I have 450 years of otherwise. And always keep that at the front of your mind.
I love that. That's incredible. Liz, what about you?
I would say just keep being open and sharing what you're doing. Share the new things you're doing, share what works, maybe share what doesn't work. A lot of people don't talk about that. Like, oh, we tried to have this concert and this thing happened and this wasn't great. Just to keep inspiring us, because as singers, when we look around and we see companies, regardless of their size or status, when we see people doing interesting things that resonate with us and that are exciting and new, it inspires us to keep practicing, so just keep sharing those things and keep having these conversations.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I find that small companies are more agile anyway, and we have the ability to adapt because we don't have that large, older conservative donor base to really pay attention to. But Meroë, what are you thinking?
Hi, I'd say that when looking at you all already have a wonderful mission statement, but still remain flexible as you go through the years. Go back and look at what you said you were about originally, and feel free to adapt and change as the climate in the United States changes. As us as singers don't want to be put in a box, you don't have to put yourself in one either. You can change, and it's your baby, so you can do what you want.
Hey, Gabe, what about you?
I would say, like, as Imani was saying, opera is always changing, and this was saying everybody loves to be inspired. I think what is inspiring, especially right now, is equity. And a lot of people, when they see diversity and equity, they feel inspired. So whenever you have the chance, hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist. Always move towards that what feels inspiring. I totally agree with Liz. I love that.
Well, y'all, this discussion has been absolutely amazing. I was thrilled to listen tonight. Thank you for your time, your effort, your energy. I feel inspired. I'm about to go sit down and work some more. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Be sure to visit rivercityopera.org. You can join our mailing list or even make a donation. And be sure to like and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And while you're at it, you can hit the subscribe button down there too. That won't hurt. This has been The Dish with RTO. We thank you again for joining us, and we wish you and your loved ones health and safety. Have a great night.